Hi everyone, welcome to episode 22 of Engaging the Ego, exploring US foreign policy in Southeast Asia. We're a podcast produced by the US program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS. I'm Kevin, an Associate Research Fellow at USP.
Hi, this is Adrian, Research Fellow and Coordinator of the US program.
And we'll be your host for this episode on US-Indonesia ties under Trump 2.0, Part 1. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto was one of the first foreign leaders to publicly congratulate Donald Trump on his electoral victory in November 2024. There are hopes that the two leaders might build a close personal relationship. Yet there are also sources of friction and challenges. Prabowo is a leader who wishes to build the capacity of his country to exert more power on the international stage, but this would necessarily involve deeper engagement with China. Developments such as Indonesia's admission to BRICS may sour Trump's view of the country. Washington's de-emphasis on the impacts of climate change might also be a disappointment for Indonesian leaders. Now, for this episode, we're going to do something a little different. This is the first of a 2-episode special on US-Indonesia ties, with our first guest being Dr Yohanes Sulaiman, Associate Professor in International Relations at Universitas Jenderal Achmad Yani, Indonesia. Thanks for joining us today, Yohanes.
Thank you for inviting me here.
So, Yohanes, if I may, how would you characterize the current state of ties between the US and Indonesia?
That reminds me of an old joke, basically. As a person was asked, how's the situation? And then in one word, and the person say, good. And then, how about if saying in the 2 words? Well, not good. But basically, the situation between United States and Indonesia so far is cordial. It's actually pretty good because United States do understand about Indonesia's importance in the region. I'm just being cliches, but it is like the largest country in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
It is like controlling the global waterway between Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. It is basically important geographically, lots of population, and important strategically, and things like that. So United States do have to pay attention, and that's Indonesia has been using it quite strategically in order to build close relationship with United States and China. But the problem is, of course, in so far it sounds good, but the question is what happened in the future when, let's say, the dispute between the United States and China are getting increased because Indonesia at this point does not want to pick sides and it also wants to maintain its so-called hegemony, its importance in the region. But then the clash between the United States and China, drastic impact on it. And the question is, of course, on everybody's analysts say, well, whether Indonesia is prepared for that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. US-China tensions probably weigh very heavily on the bilateral relationship. Adrian?
So, Johannes, if I could follow up on some of your points. In November 2023, President Biden signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Indonesia under previous President Jokowi. So how would you characterize the progress or the evolution in the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries? And sort of where do you see areas the two sides can move forward on in the Trump administration?
The strategic partnership is always good because, again, it signifies United States do pay much importance on Indonesia, and also Indonesia needs to build closer relations with the United States. It's relies on the United States for its security and also for its cooperation. But the problem is, I think so far, is that while the comprehensive agreement is great, but the follow-up is always weak. Sometimes it is due to the lack of attention from Washington itself. As we know, that it got distracted with every single thing under the sun. You got Gaza, you got Ukraine, you got fight with China, now Trump. So basically, it took all the oxygen from the room. And from Indonesia's side, everybody got distracted now. Prabowo now, he began a new policy of a freelance program, and he went all over the world too. So it seems like, unfortunately, and again I want to emphasize it, unfortunately, it seems like this just lack of follow-up from the executive level. From the down level, on the organizational level, it seems like things are doing the usual thing.
Yeah.
It is just they are doing it, but there's just not as much breakthrough as we hope for.
Okay, I see. So it's still a work in progress and everything. And Adrian, I think from our trip recently, I think one of the big concerns coming out of Washington is going to be the capacity of the organizations involved in foreign policy, given all the cuts and reforms going on there right now. So it's going to definitely be a point to watch how these comprehensive strategic partnerships and other related kinds of agreements are going to be executed.
Absolutely.
So, Yohanes, what kind of opportunities do Indonesian leaders see in the new Trump administration? Do they think it'll be easier to engage with Trump than with Biden? And what do they want to see from Trump?
Surprisingly, yes, actually, because when they look at Biden and like democratic presidents in general of getting too concerned about human rights, too concerned about environment, basically like they have to walk on the thin eggshell because because there are just so many things that can go wrong. Like if something happens and then, oh my God, there will be another embargo. But Trump is more transactional. He doesn't care about human rights, similar to other Republican presidents. Like, remember, it was Clinton who imposed embargo in Indonesia, and it was Bush who lifted it. And Bush said, oh yeah, we need to partner in the war against terror. So yeah, here are the weapon back. For Indonesia, Republican government is usually easier to work with because they are so transactional. But the problem now is Trump. The first Trump seems to be like, fine, it is, we like him because he thinks about us. And remember, last time, he kept sending people like Pompeo to Indonesia to visit, and it was actually seen as a big deal there. But the problem is now Pompeo is gone.
Yes.
And then Rubio, I think he's capable, but the problem is we don't know like how strong he is. Like, where is his position in the totem pole power? As we know, Trump seems to be like very garrulous guy. He just whimsical to whatever he wants or whatever he thinks, and that make it kind of like difficult. Can we rely on the same United States assurance, security assurance, especially assuming he's going to abandon Ukraine? Of course, for many Indonesians, Ukraine's problem seems to be like they brought their own, they provoke Russia. I disagree, okay? I think that's kind of problematic view, but many things about it, so that's why they keep saying that, we have to be very careful because look at Ukraine. They are very careless. They got hit by Russia. So they got their own desert like that. But the problem is that's the same thing that I can ask Indonesian also, like, look, you're joining the freaking BRICS? And Trump just said that he's going to impose a 100% tariff on BRICS. That's a problem with it. So, second one is unfortunately is far more unpredictable. And plus, the problem for Indonesia is also we got so much distracted by domestic problem, by domestic distractions. The new capital that's very expensive, these freelance things, and so we also got distracted a lot by domestic problems, and it just getting scarier. It's just kind of getting difficult to think about like how to deal with Trump with all the domestic squabbles now.
I see. And just to pick up on something you mentioned, could you walk us a little bit through what happened with Indonesia and BRICS for the benefit of our audience, and how big of a, shall we say, a point of tension do you think this is going to be in the US-Indonesia relationship?
Well, BRICS has been in Indonesia horizon for many years since Jokowi. Remember, it was during Jokowi's era that they actually extended the invitation for Indonesia to join BRICS. So it's not like something that happened right away. But at that time, Minister like Erlangga Hartanto disagreed of Indonesia joining BRICS because by joining BRICS, it seems like we are going to abandon our pursuit in joining OECD. And Erlangga Hartanto think that it's much better for Indonesia to join OECD and BRICS just too complicated, and especially remember it is basically a grouping of countries that has very little in common with each other. And there's very little trade between South Africa and India and Brazil. China is the only countries that do trade with everyone.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps like only India and Russia, but again, it is kind of not that interlinked anyway. Erlangga was sensible when he's saying that, look, by joining BRICS, Indonesia will get too much distraction. It's better focus on our energy on joining OECD. But when Prabowo came to power, what he really wants to have is to show an accomplishment. Achievement, like, okay, this is my first 100 years. I want to show everybody that we already have an achievement. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons why he ordered Indonesia to join BRICS. I don't buy the argument like, it is about time, or maybe there are so many benefits in joining BRICS, because again, BRICS' main trade partner is China, and we already have China as our main partner. So what else to add? China is not going to come and say, Indonesia, now you're joining BRICS, I'm going to give you like zero tariff. I don't think so. So there's not much more economic benefit in joining BRICS. And of course, another problem is that now with Russia invading Ukraine. Then you have European Unions so opposed to Russia, and then also, I don't know what Trump's going to do later, but just talk about now, the United States will put embargo on Russia because of invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So my feeling is that sooner or later, Indonesia joining BRICS is going to hurt our position more, because it is much easier to say, hey, I'm not going to join BRICS, than, hey, I'm already in, I want to get out. The second one is far more embarrassing. Then the question will be like, why on earth you are joining in the first place if you are going to resign later? So it is putting us in a really bad spot. That's my opinion.
And I suppose another thing, especially with this new Trump administration, actions like this can sometimes, attract unwanted attention from Washington. Which brings me to my next question, actually. Indonesia is not one of the countries on Trump's current tariff hit list for the region because, it doesn't have a very big trade surplus with the US as compared to, say, Vietnam or Thailand. I mean, it's inevitably going to be affected by any trade war or trade, skirmish that breaks out. How do you think Indonesia is regarding this prospect of trade disruptions?
I think we already think about it a lot, but we prefer not to think about it. Because if you look at what really going on nowadays with economic situation and troubles, and it is the last thing that Indonesia wants to happen, like more unwanted attention. That's why I think for the past couple of months, it's kind of flying under the radar, which is good policy to some degree.
Indonesia would probably have to explore, more deeper integration with the ASEAN bloc, the usual spiel, and to try and ward off the effects of these tariffs and so on. That said, though, I think one of the bright spots of the Trump administration coming back to power was that the kind of revived prospects of a critical minerals agreement between the US and Indonesia, right?
It is, but again, the problem is like the devil is in detail as usual. Critical mineral mining is hazardous, it is very polluting, it is cost intensive, and it is environmentally damaging. And I don't know whether we want to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and true. And I think the other thing is that because Indonesia's nickel industry as well is got a lot of and a very big Chinese presence as well. There might be a few, points of friction or tension if the US wants to start any partnership and discovers that.
I think Indonesian themselves, the government, will actually welcome it, because if you talk to many people inside it, they already say that we are getting too much closer to China more than we really comfortable with. But that's the problem, because China is the only one willing to invest in those kind of stuff. I mean, as you all know, nickel refinery is pretty much not that profitable. It is very risky. Sometimes the price can just collapse. So it is too risky. That's why so many companies are not touching it by 9-foot pole.
That's true. In that case, talking about economics, do you think there are any kind of low-hanging fruits when it comes to engagement between the US and Indonesia?
I think for Indonesian government, calculation is simple. As long as the United States come in and bring money to invest, we will just welcome it. We don't care about China's opinion. We just give them whatever they want. We just need the freaking money with all this thing. But again, the problem is United States at this point is operating under the assumption that, look, we only make deals with the government. The companies are the ones that doing the investment. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, companies look at the nickel and then they just don't think of it as something that profitable. It is very risky. That's why only big companies ordered by Chinese government willing to invest. And I don't know how Trump can do it.
Moving on from economics, though, one of the interesting things that we heard in DC was how the Washington under this new Trump administration, it wants more burden sharing from its allies and partners. It wants them to kind of step up to the plate, either intentionally or kind of leaving a vacuum for them to exercise their own leadership. Let's say if the US wanted to pressure Indonesia to take a more active role in regional issues such as maybe the South China Sea, how do you think Prabowo would react?
Prabowo will say that we will maintain our independence. We will be actively trying to solve problems with South China Sea. We will try to make sure that there's no war there. But that may be the extent that he will say that. Basically, I don't think United States should expect Indonesia to suddenly bolster its defense spending from barely 1% of GDP now to 3 or 5% like NATO standard. Because first of all, there's no money, okay? I hate to say this, but there's just no money. And then, of course, most of the money also went to the personnel. So we need more armaments. We need more battleships. We need more cruiser. We need basically like everything under the sun. And that will cost a lot for our budget, and that's basically will kill it. In addition to all the commitment. So I think that's what's going to happen. Indonesia will basically stall. Basically, we'll say that we're going to do our best. But by the end of the day, I don't think there will be like much changes in policies. And also another thing that you have to consider is China. I mean, regardless how much Indonesia fear China, but it also realized that China is the only source of investment so far. Like you mentioned in the previous section, China is the only one willing to invest in risky endeavor in Indonesia. And so Indonesia cannot afford to alienate China because it needs the investment. Unless Trump come and say, yeah, I mean, don't worry about China. I mean, I'm going to give you all the money you need for investment and you give me better terms, then yeah. But at this point, I don't think Trump is going to do that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Adrian?
That's certainly the case. One of the things that is obvious in the region is that China's investments are really state-led. A lot of BRI, whereas American investments in the region are FDI, privately driven, and it's hard for the US government to make such commitments on the behalf of private companies.
Yeah, that's right.
But interestingly, the feeling in Indonesia actually like we just don't like both United States and China getting too influential in the region. For Indonesia, the best case scenario is that both United States and China not interfere that much because this is our backyard. This is our, basically Indonesia's sphere of influence. But of course, the problem is Indonesia cannot do that. That's why we have to manage them. But if United States is asking like whether Indonesia should take care, that's what we are supposed to do anyway because it's our backyard. But again, the problem is at this point is the lack of resources.
I see. Thank you. Then, in that case, in our first episode for this podcast series that we started in early 2023, one of our takeaways was that the future of the US-Indonesia relationship was quite bright. Unless a big crisis broke out in the Middle East, which, well, later that year we know what happened, how do you expect the crisis in Gaza to continue affecting ties between Jakarta and Washington?
There are two things that we need to separate here. First is the public opinion, which is very much against United States.
Yeah.
Many elites also have soured on the United States because of the problem with Gaza, because it is all about Palestinian solidarity. It is about like fellow Muslim getting killed by Israelis. So it is just a problem that Indonesian government has to be very, very careful in dealing with the public opinion. But on the flip side, the elites also knows, when I said elites, it is like the one that really make decision. Also knows that by the day, Gaza simply does not matter that much. I'm not saying that, I don't care about Palestinian suffering. That's my point here. My point is that it is far from Indonesia. It is actually not something within our national interest, except if we want to follow the will of our population. Of course, I will get hammered by people saying, but there is in the preamble in the Constitution saying that we have to help ending the colonialization, we have to help people who are still being oppressed, whatever like that. But we are talking about realpolitik here.
Yeah.
And they know that damaging relations with the United States simply does not worth the cost.
Yeah.
Basically. So the Indonesian government will rightly keep stressing the need to end the conflict in Gaza. And Prabowo went there and said the same thing, which is great.
Yeah.
Because that's really our position. But when push comes to shove, I don't think Gaza will suddenly make every single Indonesian elite to scream and say, now we're going to join China because United States is making bad policies on Gaza. I don't think that will happen.
I see. Thank you. That does remind me of this very interesting article that came out, I think about a month ago. Trump's envoy to the Middle East, when he was talking about the Gaza situation, he mentioned that, Indonesia might be a potential place where we could send, displaced Gaza refugees. And that caused quite a stir because Indonesia was a consultant on these proposals, I believe. Yeah. But it kind of brings me to my main question. From the Indonesia side, there's, like you said, there's only a certain extent to which the Gaza issue can weigh on US-Indonesia ties. But from Washington's perspective, I wonder if, Indonesia tries to speak up for different kind of US policy on Gaza. Do you think that might upset people in Washington? particularly Mr. Trump?
That's a tough question because at this point, I think everything will upset him.
Yeah.
But Indonesia position is clear. I mean, we don't like what happened in Gaza. We don't accept expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, especially to resettle them in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And even if Indonesians accept Palestinians as brothers, there's no way we are going to accept Palestinians refugee here. I mean, look what happened with the Rohingyas. I mean, becoming such a big deal that there were like riots in Aceh to expel the Rohingyas refugees. And I don't think that it will go there. But again, the possibilities of Indonesia accepting the refugees from Palestine in the first place also is pretty much nil. Simply because Indonesia is always against expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So, Yohanes, as we talk more broadly about the relationship, it's still quite early on in the new Trump administration. They're still filling new spaces in the national security apparatus. The Doge is still undergoing its reforms and cuts of the civil service. But after the dust is settled, and we're 1 year into the administration, a year from now, what do you expect to see in the US-Indonesia relationship?
Well, first of all, the caveat is I hope that we will see some adult in the room, like Ethelbert Corby. Some people maybe don't like him, but I like him. I think he's a really, really nice, smart guy. I mean, he knows what the hell he's doing. And being an Assistant Secretary of Defense will be very helpful to put a lot of context to help Pentagon or even Trump to see like the strategic importance of Southeast Asia and then act accordingly. If that's what's really happened, then we do hope that Trump will accord the region the attention that it really deserves. Like the region really needs United States attention in terms of like more aid, more cooperation, more exchange. Because at this point, what we see is a growing China influence in the region, which is not at all positive. Because especially for Indonesia, even though Indonesia may be seen as too close to China, but at the same time, we actually doesn't like that. We prefer to have a balance. We prefer both United States and China engage in the region and then work together constructively to improve the livelihood of everyone. That's the optimistic take of what's going on now.
Yeah. I suppose the alternative take might be that, if Washington doesn't have any positive reason to engage Indonesia, then the best we can hope for, I think, Adrian, you kind of discussed it before, it's this idea of benign neglect, right?
Yes. Basically, not being on the Trump administration's radar might maybe the best the region can hope for.
That would also mean kind of flying under the radar when it comes to issues that might potentially provoke him, like talking about trade imbalances or whatever his latest issue is when it comes to domestic politics. Well, Yohanes, what do you think of this idea that, perhaps the best way to preserve the relationship, some distance might benefit both Indonesia and the US?
In short term, I agree. With Trump going on the wild path like this, the last thing we need is like to go straight in front of him. You get rolled over right away.
Yeah.
But in the long run, that basically Trump is going to concede the region to China.
Yeah.
And that will also hurt American interests.
Yes.
And not only American interests, but also Indonesian interests. Because again, in what Indonesia wants is both United States and China to either ignore the region, which is impossible, or to involve in the region positively. We want both United States and China engaging positively in the region.
Yes.
So if United States ignore the region in the long run, I'm afraid that, United States can get it worse night where you got like everything from the North Pole to the South Pole owned by China and its ally. Basically like the domino theory.
And it's something we have to watch going forward. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, and I think for many people, with situation going on like now in Washington, I think the best thing people can do now is pray to whatever God you believe in.
Well, that's an interesting takeaway. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Yohanes. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If there are any questions or topics that you'd like us to tackle in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or through email. Until next time, stay safe and we'll see you again.